President Cyril Ramaphosa has closed ranks, stepping in as a political shield around Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana, who he insists is going nowhere. Despite mounting calls for Godongwana's head over the budget crisis, Ramaphosa and the ANC say there's no need for him to step aside. The president was speaking at the official Workers' Day commemorations held in Middelburg in Mpumalanga on Thursday. This week, Ramaphosa also launched an inquiry into whether there were deliberate attempts to delay or interfere with the prosecutions of the Apartheid-era crimes referred by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to the NPA. And in a landmark ruling, the Constitutional Court has declared that inmates can use personal computers inside their prison cells, provided it's for educational purposes. And further afield, it's been 100 days since Donald Trump made his spectacular return to the Oval Office. We reflect on the good, bad, and downright astonishing. I'm Ziyanda Ngcobo, and you're watching Your Week in Politics. Budget 3.0 is scheduled to be tabled in Parliament on the 21st of May by Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana. The rigmarole over the value-added tax increase and the current dilemma of how to cover the 75 billion rand shortfall has exposed cracks in the system. But President Cyril Ramaphosa says this is the growing pains of a developing democracy and insists that his finance minister is going nowhere.
We've drawn a lot of lessons from all this. And because we are drawing a lot of lessons from all this, this is something that we need to take on board, and it doesn't lead to a Minister of Finance resigning or stepping down. No. It should be on all of us to say, what lessons are we learning from this? And what is it that we can do, that we can strengthen, learn from the budgetary process? Now, this happens in many other more developed, say, if you like, economies and democracies. Now, this moment has now come to us. Next year's budget is going to be a process where South Africans, I would say many of them, will now inform themselves about the various components of the budget.
The Umkhonto weSizwe Party and EFF have called for Godongwana to step down, but he's standing firm, saying he's not done anything wrong.
Now, it would be unfair to say to me, having performed in terms of my constitutional obligations of proposing a money bill in Parliament and get into an environment of multi-party environment which created largely attention, and then say, I must resign. At this stage where I sit, I think in that context, people must understand this thing in that context. By the way, on this question, let me conclude by saying that decision does not lie with me. It lies with the president.
Parliament says it's ready to move ahead with the processes that follow the tabling of the Budget 3.0, including adopting a revised fiscal framework. The National Assembly's Programming Committee, which sets the parliamentary calendar, met on Wednesday and reaffirmed its commitment to stick to the new timeline.
The lessons we've all learned, and I think as South Africans, is that maybe for a long time we had not paid much attention to the budget process. And I think this has enabled us to really fix our eyes on how the national budget is actually crafted from the beginning until the end. So we've become wiser as a society, in my view, given the challenging process that we've gone through. I am therefore confident that starting from cabinet, they would really examine the views of the electorate. They have been listening to what communities have been saying, and they will then make sure that that budget that is tabled on the 21st take these views and concerns on.
Godongwana says government has agreed not to go ahead with the proposed 0.5 percentage point VAT hike, and there are no plans to raise other taxes either. He was speaking at a media briefing held in Tshwane on Wednesday, where he outlined the way forward.
We will balance the budget without raising VAT while protecting vital services like education, health, and social grants. Going forward, the Treasury's focus is threefold. First, as I've indicated, we must balance the budget by managing our cost better. Raising other taxes besides VAT further was not an option. It would harm growth, savings, and jobs. Borrowing more would worsen our debt crisis.
It's been 2 months since the first attempt at tabling a budget on the 19th of February, which was postponed following the leak of the proposed VAT hike. The second attempt on the 12th of March saw parties adopting the fiscal framework with the tax increase, but that was set aside by the Western Cape High Court last week. Despite political wranglings behind the scenes, the National Treasury says the country's laws have allowed government spending to continue largely unaffected.
You'll know that the PFMA does allow provision for spending to continue. So fortunately, we have a provision in the PFMA that says that the departments can continue to spend in line with the previous year's budget up until certain limits. And so from a spending point of view, the business of government is continuing.
Tension remains between the two biggest government of national unity partners, despite claims of reconciliation. ANC Secretary General Fikile Mbalula, speaking at a media briefing after Godongwana's on Wednesday, says the DA must change its approach if the budget process is to improve in the future.
Behind the scenes, the DA was not only bargaining for budget concessions, they were pushing for a new labor regime that will allow employers to dismiss workers without due process, dismantle affirmative action, and roll back transformation. We will not relent in defending the progressive, legal, and constitutional framework that protects workers today. We'll never allow the working class to become collateral damage in budget negotiations.
Chairperson of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts and Rise Mzansi leader, Songezo Zibi, says the reality of making tough policy choices is fast approaching.
MPs have said we can't borrow anymore. MPs have said we don't want new taxes, not personal income tax, not VAT. So Parliament has painted itself into a corner by saying the only option is to cut expenditure by 75 billion over the next 3 years. So the budget the finance minister must table before Parliament must reflect the wishes of political parties, which is to cut spending. And if they frame it any other way, they are being dishonest. So all I was saying is that Parliament has no choice. It has already made its choice to cut expenditure.
Thursday marked Workers' Day in South Africa, with political parties holding rallies across the country. At COSATU's main event in Middelburg in Mpumalanga, ANC's alliance partners didn't pull punches. Speaker after speaker addressed the budget crisis and the urgent need to create more jobs. Unsurprisingly, the South African Communist Party's Solly Mapaila seized the opportunity to double down the party's opposition to the inclusion of the DA in the GNU. To make matters worse, it's that very same DA that is set to challenge the Employment Equity Amendment Act in court next Tuesday.
Down with the GNU, down. Down with the GNU, down.
We are saying, Comrade President, as the head of state, the ANC have developed a manifesto that is good, that says we'll do this, we'll do that. But we are waiting unashamedly because the unemployment continues to increase. Lastly, as SANCO, we are saying we don't want anything that talks about VAT. In COSATU, I'm from COSATU. In COSATU, we fought against VAT until it succumbed. Even today, we continue to fight against that.
I want to start where Comrade Richard Klope left and say, down with VAT, down. Down with VAT, down. Forward with the NHI, forward. Forward with the implementation of Bella Act, forward. Down with the GNU, down. Down with the GNU, down. Down with the reactionary forces that want to divert our revolution, down.
We demand transformation, not tokenism.
COSATU President Zingiswa Losi has outlined what the Labour Federation believes should be prioritized in the budget on May 21st.
We also want to salute Parliament for rejecting the regressive VAT hike. But sifuna ukuthi siyijonge ngemehlo lokhozi ngoba singathi kanti sifakwe iwule emehlweni xa sithi siyanikezela sibona izinto zijika. The budget, comrades, must be progressive and not punishing. The budget must be able to stimulate the economic growth. It must create jobs and it must tax the wealth. We are saying fix municipalities, pay workers kamaspala, fire corrupt municipal managers, end the rot and do it now.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you EFF, thank you EFF.
Speaking at the EFF's Workers' Day rally in Rustenburg, party leader Julius Malema claimed victory in blocking the proposed tax increase.
But 2% VAT, rareka stsene ka mo parlamenti. Ba tswa ba chaba, ba bua ba kukuna ba 0.5 VAT. Rari rinya ke le 0 ene o le vulela le point e le 5. A di tsamaye ka mo ga di 0.5 tšeo tša le. Ba nana re a dlala, ba re bona ba tla voutela le di opposition tše ding ba passe VAT, ba e passa ra le passage illegal. Ai mo molaong re leisha court ba nana re a dlala ra ba isha court ra ba phara hwepe ra incha VAT. Wa bona re ba re ba bua ka di 21 tša May le ba botše gore ba bue le molao wa straight ka re ha ba ka tla ka molao o tswileng tseleng e ka se pase ka kua parlamenteng.
The South African Federation of Trade Unions warns the high levels of youth unemployment are a ticking time bomb in this country.
The levels of unemployment in this country constitute what we have consistently referred to as a powder keg, a ticking time bomb. No country can afford to have 60% of its young people roaming the streets without any hope of ever getting unemployment. We have a structural unemployment that is long-term. In South Africa, 60% of the unemployed people have been unemployed for over 5 years. These young, graying South Africans who have never seen a door of employment opportunity. The situation is dire.
The second biggest partner in the Government of National Unity, the DA, is taking the Labour Minister to court next Tuesday to challenge Section 15A of the Employment Equity Amendment Act. Now, this part of the legislation allows the Minister to set employment equity targets for around 18 economic sectors. The DA has launched a constitutional challenge arguing that it gives the executive authority unchecked power to impose quotas that it argues could destroy jobs and harm the economy.
We've got 20 years, we've got an experiment for 20 years. It hasn't righted the wrongs of the past. And so what we're saying is we need to go back. It can't just be unchecked ability of a minister just to enforce rigid quotas. What we need to do is, and we've explained ways and means of growing the economy. It's simple. You deregulate instead of more regulations. And the whole world is telling us, even the government, the current government is saying, we understand that there is a need to deregulate, because in that same piece of legislation, they're now putting that if your business is under 50 people, we're going to actually exempt you from this. Why? Because they know that the legislation will hamper the small business sector, and it's the small business sector that is creating jobs.
Kosatu has questioned the DA's motives and whether their actions align with the spirit of the Constitution.
We're quite surprised, actually. The DA is part of the GNU. And for it to jump on this bandwagon of wanting to challenge the Employment Equity Act is actually quite disappointing for us. The DA knows as much as everybody else that the Constitution of this country says the wrongs of the past must be righted. And so that's exactly what the Employment Equity Act does in terms of that. And we'll see that in South Africa still 60% of top management positions still belong to white people, where else, the majority of the workers, about 81% are black, colored, and Indian. But then they are very, their representation at top level is about 17%. And so you can see the disparities of apartheid are still continuing.
After the break, we look at the inquiry launched by President Cyril Ramaphosa to probe whether there was a deliberate attempt to block the investigation of TRC cases referred to the National Prosecuting Authority. We also reflect on how the world and geopolitics have shifted since U.S. President Donald Trump's return to the White House as he marked his first 100 days back in office. And this week, the Constitutional Court handed down a judgment, listen to this, allowing for prison inmates to use personal computers in their cells, but only for educational purposes. More on that shortly. Stay tuned. It's been quite the ride since President Donald Trump returned to the White House 100 days ago. He marked the milestone with a campaign-style rally in Michigan, saying he's only getting started on delivering the promises he made to Americans. The Republican maintains that his imposition of tariffs on U.S. trading partners could lead to a resurgence in domestic manufacturing. And true to fashion, Trump gave himself a glowing review.
And we're here tonight in the heartland of our nation to celebrate the most successful first 100 days of any administration in the history of our country, and that's according to many, many people. This is the best, they say, 100-day start of any president in history, and everyone is saying it. We've just gotten started. You haven't even seen anything yet. It's all just kicking in.
Newzroom Africa's U.S. correspondent Simon Marks says, while Trump's speech took some liberties with the facts, he has delivered on his promise to tighten immigration and increase security at the Mexican border. Moves well received by his supporters.
I think that the heart of the speech that President Trump made there in Michigan was kind of encapsulated by his embrace of the Economist newspaper, which last weekend said that Donald Trump had been already the most consequential president in American history in terms of his first 100 days. But what Donald Trump didn't tell the crowd is that the Economist also argued that in that 100 days he had done lasting damage to the United States in terms of its democracy, in terms of the constitutional guardrails that he has largely steamrolled, in terms of his dramatic expansion of executive power, and most importantly, in terms of America's standing with the rest of the world, the impact that he's had on alliances that the United States has enjoyed for decades in many cases. So, I mean, this was an up is down, black is white, right is left speech that the president made that was full of falsehoods, frankly. I mean, interpretations that he is placing on all of this tsunami of activity that we've seen over the last 100 days that are just not borne out by the facts.
Now to a landmark constitutional court ruling. In a unanimous judgment handed down on Wednesday, South Africa's highest court ruled that inmates must be allowed to access their personal computers in their prison cells specifically for educational purposes. The case was brought by inmate Mbalenhle Sydney Ntuli, who argued that limited access to communal computer labs was preventing him from completing his data processing course. Correctional Services had defended its 2007 policy banning in-cell computer use, citing security concerns. But the Apex Court upheld Ntuli's arguments as represented by Lawyers for Human Rights, citing his right to further his education.
Throughout the history of this legal matter and similar matters before it, the department has always said, oh, this is a security risk, this is going to lead to broader issues. And in every instance, the courts have invited the Department of Correctional Services to say, well, show us this security risk, give us the evidence of it. And the Department of Correctional Services has not been able to do that. Similarly, the courts have said, well, can you provide access for people, during the time that cells are open to computer labs where they are able to complete their degrees under the supervision of correctional services officials? And again, similarly, as you might see from the judgment, access to computer labs, to learning materials were provided very sporadically. Access to the computer labs is very sporadic. It only takes place for 2 to 3 hours a day, which didn't allow people to actually complete the degrees that they needed to do, spend the time studying that they needed to do. And the department couldn't show why they provided this inconsistent access.
President Cyril Ramaphosa has launched an inquiry into the delays by the National Prosecuting Authority in handling cases referred to it by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which investigated atrocities committed by the Apartheid regime. This comes after over 20 families of the victims launched a civil claim against the state for failing to fully investigate the murder, torture and abduction of their loved ones by the racist system. A statement from the presidency highlighted persistent allegations of improper influence which have hindered the investigation and prosecution of the apartheid-era crimes. The commission, it said, aims to bring the matter to finality. Now, the establishment of the inquiry comes after settlement discussions between the government and the victims' families.
I'll soon be announcing the names of those who are going to lead the commission. And this is as a result of the continued pain and suffering that those who suffered through the atrocities of the apartheid government want to find closure, because people were killed, people were maimed and injured, and families want to know exactly what happened. And they also want to know why, what gave rise to us as a government having slow movement in actually investigating those cases and prosecuting them.
While the families have welcomed the establishment of the inquiry, they still have concerns about how the government will deal with their other requests in the court action.
It's not all good news because, we asked the court to actually do two things besides getting the president to agree to set up commission. The one is really to provide the victims of apartheid-era crimes with a declaration that their rights were violated, and that in fact their rights were violated because of the unlawful conduct which resulted in obstruction by the state and its institutions. And then, of course, the second, a claim that we made was that we were looking for constitutional damages to really vindicate the families on the violations that have affected them. And the third form of relief that we asked for was the setting up of a commission of inquiry. Now, we understood initially that, in fact, there would be mediation around the way in which the first two claims would be dealt with, the declaration and the question of constitutional damages. And instead, I think what the president decided to do was to set up this commission and in fact to roll up all of the claims into this one commission, which is really problematic.
That's all from me for This Week in Politics. Coming up in the next few days, the DA, the second biggest partner in the Government of National Unity, is challenging the Employment Equity Amendment Act in the High Court in Pretoria on Tuesday. Now, this may trigger more tensions between them and the ANC, especially since their deployee leads the Labour portfolio. There'll be plenty more on the go here on Newzroom Afrika, channel 405. But for now, it's goodbye. Thank you for watching.